Although there are a few people who've talked about bringing the draft back to America, very few people actually support that. And the people who are most opposed to bringing a draft back are actually the military itself. If you talk to senior officers at the Pentagon, they think the idea of bringing a draft back would be horrible. Because today they have the most effective and most efficient military ever, and they have that because Americans volunteer. And there's no good economic argument for a draft. A draft allows the military to pay its soldiers less, but society as a whole pays more because you're forcing people into uniform who don't want to serve, while people who would be more likely to serve and would like to come in aren't able to because they're displaced by a draft. So the U.S. experience has been a volunteer military is far superior. It's more efficient economically for society, and it's turned out to have a much more effective military. So I don't see any serious support for a draft. Well, the most obvious thing, I think, for policymakers in Moscow would be to look at the experience of countries that have moved to a volunteer military. I mean, France is another one. It's not just the United States. The U.S. experience is almost 40 years old. Other countries have done it as well. But if they look at the American military, during Vietnam, American military had enormous problems, violence within the ranks, attacks on officers, a lot of resistance. And the U.S. today has a military that's very effective, because soldiers volunteer, they stay longer, and they get trained. So I would encourage Moscow policymakers to look and realize they could get themselves a better military with far less problems at home. I mean, the problems of violence used against draftees, the problems of hazing, these are all things that really come from a conscript military. If you got rid of conscription, you'd have less social problems and you'd have a better military. And I think that they should look at the experience around them. And Russians, people should make arguments in terms of economic efficiency. They should argue that the way to encourage Russian patriotism is to encourage people to join. It's not to draft people, but it's to bring people in voluntarily. And if you want a stronger Russian military that really is more effective when it needs to be, I would argue that a volunteer military in Russia is likely to be a better military.